It now gives me great pleasure to welcome to the stage Claudia Fan Munce. Most of you will know from her work with IBM Venture Capital. She's also Vice President for IBM, so a real leader for us all within this industry and ecosystem. She's going to have the great pleasure of having a fireside chat with Arvind Sodhani from Intel Capital, who again probably doesn't need too many words to this audience here. But Claudia, please come on the stage.
So I really have a great pleasure here. I think, not just between you and the cocktail party, which is always my favorite time slot. Arvind even suggested we send you off for a drink before we do this, but we're going to try without a drink. Of course, I think Arvind does not need a lot of introduction. Obviously, he's a well-known leader of our industry, probably the pioneer. If you see all the statistics, they're consistently ran as #1 in corporate venture again. I saw a new report at the first quarter 2015. So I'm going to ask Arvind to join me here on stage. Let's see. You have all the seats to cover.
Hi, Claudia.
Sit closer to me here.
Thank you. Can I sit here?
Yes,
Okay,
please. So one other thing I want to do also, Arvind was here last year, for those of you that were here, and gave a great talk about Intel Capital, and of course, a lot has happened since then. Lisa earlier talked about the new diversity, and we saw the education announcement. I mean, they're just non-stoppable, obviously, with leading so many rounds. The CB Insight talk about how Intel Capital is making more investment in the fintech space than some of the traditional VCs. So we're going to structure this in a way that allow you to ask whatever question you have in your mind. I'm going to start with a few fundamental catching up kind of question to you, Arvind. And then from there, you need to be thinking about what unique question you have in your mind that you'd like to ask Arvind. So just to get started, just to do a recap in case some of you weren't here in the past years, Arvind, this is obviously a tremendous endeavor for you as Executive Vice President from Intel Corporation, but a president of Intel Capital since 2005. You've been sticking to a very firm model of doing this, developing the ecosystem. Of course, most of us has been your CEO Summit and saw the scale of that thing. Tell us what is going on right now in the last year since you've been here, that what you're seeing that is really exciting, that is transformative of this industry.
So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me back, and I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted to have Claudia ask me questions and do the fireside chat. So thank you very much. Great to see all of you again. I think the biggest thing that happened to us over the last 12 months is probably drones.
Okay.
We are beginning to recognize the potential of drones. I think that drones will stream a lot of data.
Yes.
And I think of drones, I'm a simple guy. I try to relate to other things. I think of drones as a smartphone plus. And the plus stands for, so let me explain smartphone. A drone has virtually everything that a smartphone has in it. In addition, it also has to fly. It has to have the navigation systems. It has to have the flight control systems. And in fact, there are 2 smartphones, one in the drone itself and one in the control panel. In fact, many of the control panels that are currently available actually use a smartphone. But many of the manufacturers of drones are actually incorporating an Android-based smartphone into their control panels. And the plus stands for the fact that it has to navigate, it has to fly, it has to steer itself, and has to have collision avoidance. But ultimately, I believe that smartphones will generate a ton of data. And 4K data, we are beginning to see drones coming out with 4K, which obviously will generate a ton of data, which will find its way through the ecosystem. And it's the ecosystem that we are heavily invested in.
Yep.
And promote into servers, storage, networking, obviously, wirelessly done all the way through to the network, into the data center or the cloud. And then companies, enterprises, governments, et cetera, are going to do analytical work. So think of Hadoop, because the amount of data they will generate. So it plays into all of our strengths, obviously.
Right.
So that's something that we've been pursuing hot and heavy all over the world. We will have some announcements coming out pretty soon here. So
you can't
drones
quite
is
tell
one.
us.
The other one is autonomous driving.
Oh, yes.
I think before we see autonomous driving, we'll probably see cars that will promise that they will never crash into anything.
I'm waiting for that for my teenager daughter.
Yeah, exactly. For me too, because I have a bad habit of doing emails and text while I'm driving, and I've already crashed into the car in front of me 3 times in the recent past.
Not the car that I know, right? That is way too bad.
I think that autonomous driving is probably too far a reach. It will happen, but it will take longer. But I think what will happen before is there will be enough sensors, there will be enough compute, there will be enough communication for cars not to collide into anything around it.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that's coming, and that will happen pretty fast. I suspect that within the next 3 to 5 years, we'll begin to see cars that will just simply not collide into other things, stationary or otherwise, because there will be enough sensors, there will be braking, so those are 2 very exciting areas.
Yes.
Internet of Things, another area that we're very excited about. As you know, John Chambers has predicted Internet of Things being a multi-trillion dollar opportunity, and I really concur with that. I think this will be a huge opportunity. We're beginning to see Wi-Fi go into garage door openers, washing machines, pumps, electric lighting. So it's going to be huge.
Every controllable aspect.
Yeah, and so we're invested in that space, and we also invested in a wide area network company out of France. I think these cellular networks are going to have too much overhead. Most of these sensors are only going to transmit small amounts of data. It'll be a very small packet.
Right.
And the cellular overhead for transmitting a small packet is almost 5-6 times as big. So we'll probably get some combination of the existing networks and new networks. But I think the banking intermediation is going to get disrupted. You don't really need bricks and mortars. So I think we'll see. And ultimately, I think the central banks will get disrupted. Certainly, I would say that Bitcoin was a first attempt to disrupt the central banks. But it'll be hard. I suspect that it is so regulated. The creation of money is so regulated, obviously. So that disruption is way down the road, I think. But it might happen.
All right. Well, obviously, this is a very global audience, Arvind. As you know, they bring a very, very global representation of our peers in the corporate venture world. And I know you are traveling, as always, right, around the globe. So in terms of what you see, I know you've been talking a lot about China, and you were just in Israel. What are you seeing that excites you around the world in terms of the transformational technology and investment opportunities?
Yeah, so I was in China 3 weeks ago, and I make 7 or 8 trips to China every year. What we're beginning to see in China is a complete change in the landscape. Until about 2 years ago, 2-3 years ago, we used to see companies that were basically adoption of successful, typically US models.
It's called C2C, copy to China, right?
And usually led by turtles. Turtles refers to Chinese who are educated overseas returning to China. Recently, and we have been investing hot and heavy, we are beginning to see innovation, pure innovation in China. And focused on the Chinese market at a cost structure significantly lower than what we would
Yes.
see.
In
Obviously, valuations significantly higher because the market that they're addressing is very, huge.
Yes.
But it is amazing what we're seeing, and very scary because they're addressing the local Chinese addressable market at price points that are significantly lower than
what we can do.
Yeah, which will make these companies enormously competitive in the rest of the world.
No,
And that's a competitive threat coming
Yes.
in the future that I think we need to be all of you need to be very aware of.
Yeah, I was counting the 106, unicorn. There are 9 of them in China,
Right.
so that is a very high number, growing.
And they're inventing. Certainly Xiaomi's business model
Yes.
is a absolutely a new innovation. It's a very
Absolutely.
disruptive business model, and it's new. It's unique in China.
Now, in terms of your ecosystem development, I mean, you has always been sort of this ecosystem enabler in the venture community, not just as a corporate venture arm. Have you been doing anything that is different in that space, in working with the enablers capability that you have in bringing the ecosystem together?
So currently we're working on, obviously we look at how we invest into the whole ecosystem, and I think there's a slide that I can show you very, very quickly. So that's the ecosystem that we invest in. It stretches all the way from sensors in the Internet of Things, wearables, drones, smartphones, laptops, etc. on one end of the spectrum, and then think of data flowing from all of those devices in profusion into the wireless networks, base stations, networks, and then ultimately ending up in stores, in servers and storage. And then, of course, you do data analytics. And then there are things that are applying across the entire spectrum, which is security, silicon,
Yep.
Software, obviously, perceptual computing, another area that we're working, pushing very hard on. Perceptual computing is recognizing who you are by devices. So we have invested in a number of companies that do multi-factor authentication that involve your iris.
Wow.
So we want to be able to have devices, laptops, smartphones, etc., tablets. Just when you bring them up to your face, they will recognize you immediately, and you don't have to do any further passwords and stuff like that.
That is really exciting space. I do have to tell you guys a story, just in case you think we rehearsed this question. Since I asked him the question, the chart popped out. We were standing outside waiting for our turn to be mic'd up, and then he said, well, I have a chart about that. So in a matter of minutes, someone in California was called, and I don't even know what time it is in California, and this chart was sent over, so you get a view of this ecosystem chart. That's how Arvind operates. It is fascinating how fast, turnaround times that we were able to bring this over. Now, I think one of the things, looking at some of the...
That's what we promise our portfolio companies.
Yeah. It's like, oh, I got a chart. What time is it in California? I don't care, call.
We'll have term sheet later tonight.
That was great. No, that was very inspirational to watch. Now, one of the things we have to ask you, because we're very proud that corporate venture, led by obviously Intel Capital, are now leading rounds and making some of the huge round investment, right? The Claudia of the world. Along come the question about all the valuation component. I mean, is there a hype? If there's a high, what is going to happen when there's a correction to that, if there's a correction, and specifically to the corporate venture investors are here? How do you see this whole huge investment levels that are happening lately?
Yeah, so we are seeing a lot of corporate VCs in our deals. We didn't used to, but now we're beginning to see, and we're seeing a lot of folks. One of the things that we're experiencing is that corporate VCs, and this doesn't apply to any one of you individually, it applies to all of you collectively, I suspect. What we're seeing is that corporate VCs tend to be willing to pay up to, one, get into the deals and seem to be insensitive to the valuation, which I think is a dangerous place to be. My experience has been, and we have always thought about this very, very carefully and seriously. My belief has always been that corporate VCs will not survive the downturn unless they can show returns and also show strategic value add to the corporation.
Yeah.
Strategic value add is very intangible. It's very hard to show.
Yes.
It's difficult.
Yeah, hard to measure.
It's hard to measure. So financial returns is very concrete, very tangible, and in a downturn, that's what will help enormously to have
sustainable, that. Right.
So, and the reality of investing in this space in startups is that the losses tend to come first, unless you're lucky and you get that big outcome, in which case you're golden and you've got the pass,
right.
so
Money
to speak.
Speaks. Yep.
Losses will come first, gains will come later, and so you have to mentally prepare your decision-making bodies, be they your CEO or your CFO or
a trick for you.
Of your board of directors. The reality of investing in this space, it's not going to be all fantastic, successful outcomes.
Good.
Year
so you can now
year.
quote Arvind in preparing your leadership. That
I would certainly recommend making them fully aware that the nature of investing in this space requires staying power.
Right. A long-term view. Yes.
And we are noticing that returns are coming sooner. Certainly, we're getting exits 3 to 5 years.
Faster, yes.
A lot faster. But if we get a correction, and my suspicion is that we will get some kind of a correction here. I don't know whether it will happen in 2 years from now, or 6 months from now, or 3 years from now. But valuations are getting pretty stretched. 10 times revenue, that's getting up there.
Yes, I know.
It's getting uncomfortable.
We're in acquisition, we're seeing a lot of CEOs that are really being very unrealistic there, so it's a little dangerous time. I think is a wonderful advice, because there is such a sustaining power of the strategic corporate venture that needs to be adjusting to the time that we're in right now, that people are seeing all this bubble blurring and not understanding the valuation impact it has on the corporate venture arm.
Let me also balance that by saying that corporate VCs have a value proposition that is unique to you. In your own industry, nobody knows that industry, the roadmap, the technology know-how, the IP, how shall I put it, IP scheme or IP structure, if I may put it that way. Nobody knows that better than you do. And so you have a unique advantage to invest in that space. And you have the ability to bring unique value proposition to the portfolio companies there. Including introducing them to your business units and your business units helping them. That's the model that we have very successfully used over the years.
The anchor
over the last
client,
last 20 years, we've used that model to become, we just got ranked, and we have gotten ranked #1 for the last several years. Versus all the Excels and the
Right. And I just saw the first quarter ranking, and you guys are on the top.
We just got ranked for 10-year exits from 2005 to 2015, #1 exit versus the traditional
financial guys,
the top VCs. So it's a model that I think corporations can build. Corporate VCs can certainly build that model and can successfully execute on it. But you need staying power. You need to be able to make it through cycles.
Right. And setting the expectation always helps. I'm going to leave for questions because there is a very short time. Okay, well, we'll have one right there.
Thank you very much, Arvind. Delighted to have you here. Claudia, excellent questions. Just interested, the FT perhaps in the Lex column was a little lukewarm on the Altera deal that's been announced between Intel. But I'm wondering, is there pressure from the CEO or from the organisation to say, how can the venture unit, how can Intel Capital help deliver, say, sort of breakout products or breakout things which can really help the core group? Can you scale up and do larger deals? Is there increasing pressure on that if the core business is coming under maybe sort of analyst pressure?
Yeah, so I will not and cannot comment on Altera deal, as you would imagine. My response to this question has nothing to do, and I'm not making a comment on Altera transaction that we announced yesterday. With respect to our value proposition to Intel Corporation, it's very consistent. It's the same. We create ecosystems. Think of IoT. We're going to ultimately create the entire end-to-end ecosystem. So if you look at that slide, I think IoT is on the very left-hand side. It's going to be sensors that are buried in devices. Think of dishwasher, think of oil pumps, think of lighting. Think of enterprise warehouses. That data is going to go through either through a wide area network, which we're investing in, or it will go through a gateway, which we are investing in. It will make its way through the local network and base stations, so it's an area that we're investing in. Then it will find its way through into the servers, and it will be, the data will have to be analyzed. It will require its own structure. All those things we're investing in, and it's all happening by startup companies. So a lot of innovation, a lot of disruption of existing processes.
But it's like a string of pearl where you're sewing all the different components together for that scenario that you painted for IoT.
That's exactly right. Thank you.
Question to Arvind. You are the 800-pound gorilla and always are early in emerging markets. And in one of the roundtables today, we had a question like, how do you enter a completely new, even emerging market as an Intel Capital? I remember in Russia, on the Claudia Fan team, I think it was, you took a bet on doing 2 or 3 trial investments and learn from that. What's the approach to those many new markets you're looking at or doing currently?
Yeah, good question. Thank you. We were the first investor in Yandex, which was our second investment in Russia, and it turned golden, and it was one of those unicorns that we always talk about, or we sometimes talk about. But typically, it always turns out that the first investment is usually a learning investment for us. And we learn a lot from that. And invariably, the first investment is usually a mistake. Unfortunately, that's a reality. Because you're entering into a new space. We don't really know much about it. We're learning. And we do others after that, But the learning from the first is invaluable in the next one. And by the third one, I'll kill people or I'll fire people if they haven't, really understood what they're doing. First one, okay. First one, we don't know what we were doing. But there's, second one, we better
you better do better.
Better do it right. So yes, there's a lot of learning involved, and we benefit from getting in there first. Doing a small one, not bet the farm kind.
Any other approach, or are you still using the same approach?
It's a consistent approach. We don't want to make a big splash in the first one because we don't know enough about it. And this is true for new areas. There are areas that we already know very well, and we'll keep making investments.
Yeah. Okay, I think I'm getting the yank. I know there's a lot more questions out there, but Arvind, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure. Good to see you guys.